I called him a loser. I threw the papers at his face. She thought she was divorcing a loser in a rusty car to chase a lifetime of luxury. But karma doesn't miss a beat. 6 months later, broke and desperate, she finds herself scrubbing the floors of a multi-billion-dollar empire, only to discover the terrifying CEO sitting in the chair was the husband she threw away. Welcome to Billionaire Love Stories. Prepare yourself for this fascinating, wild, and incredibly dramatic journey.
The headlights of a battered, rusted 2005 sedan flickered as it pulled into the grand driveway of the Hayes estate. From the second-story window of her master bedroom, Sarah Hayes looked down. Her lips, painted in a perfect shade of crimson, curled into a sneer of pure disgust. "Pathetic," she whispered to the empty room. She adjusted her silk robe, a custom piece that cost more than her husband's entire net worth. Or so she thought. Down below, Brandon stepped out of the creaking car. He was tall, with broad shoulders, tired from a long day, his handsome face partially hidden by the shadows of the evening. He carefully held a small, elegantly wrapped box. It was their 1-year anniversary. To Sarah, this marriage was a prison sentence, a cruel joke orchestrated by her father, Professor Hayes. "He is my brightest student, Sarah. He has a heart of gold. He will protect you," her father had said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Protect her from what? Not having enough designer bags? What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that the poor, struggling man walking to her front door was the sole heir to the multi-billion-dollar Sterling empire. Brandon had buried his identity. He had seen how the Sterling fortune had poisoned his parents' marriage, turning it into a toxic battlefield of greed and infidelity. He wanted a woman who loved him for him. And for a long time, he believed Sarah was that woman. He remembered that day in high school. He was cornered by local thugs, bruised and bleeding. It was Sarah, the untouchable professor's daughter, who had stepped in between them, her eyes flashing with fierce defiance, ordering them to back off. In that moment, he had given her his heart. But the girl who saved him seemed to have vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating woman, obsessed with status. Earlier that afternoon, at the exclusive LeBlanc Cafe, Sarah sat across from Eric, her ex-boyfriend. Eric was everything Brandon was not on the surface. Slick, dressed in Italian suits, and dripping with old money arrogance. He reached across the marble table, lightly trailing his fingers over Sarah's hand. "Look at you, Sarah," Eric murmured, his voice smooth like venom. A queen trapped in a cage with a peasant. Sarah pulled her hand away, but not quickly enough. "Eric, don't. He's still my husband." "Is he?" Eric scoffed, leaning in. "He drives a car that belongs in a junkyard. He can't even afford to take you to Paris for your anniversary." He pulled out a sleek folder and slid it toward her. "I have connections, Sarah. I can make you a partner in my new investment firm, but you need to cut the dead weight." Sarah stared at the folder. The word divorce echoed in her mind, louder and more tempting than ever. "You deserve the world," Eric whispered, sealing her fate. Not a lifetime of counting pennies. The heavy oak door of the bedroom opened. Brandon walked in, his eyes softening as he saw her. "Happy anniversary, Sarah," he said, holding out the small velvet box. Inside was a necklace he had spent 3 months of his salary saving for. It was a test. A final, desperate test to see if she could appreciate something given with pure love, not just a black card. Sarah didn't even look at the box. She turned around, her face completely void of emotion. She walked over to her vanity, picked up a crisp, white document, and threw it onto the bed between them. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The silence that followed was deafening. Brandon lowered the velvet box slowly. The warmth drained from his eyes. replaced by a storm of disbelief and rising agony. "Sarah, what is this?" he asked, his voice rough. "It's my freedom," she shot back, crossing her arms. "I am done, Brandon. I am done pretending this is okay." "Pretending what is okay? I have loved you. I have taken care of you." "Taken care of me?" Sarah interrupted, a harsh, mocking laugh escaping her lips. "Look out the window, Brandon. Look at that pathetic excuse for a car. Look at your cheap suits." She stepped closer, her words striking him like physical blows. "My friends are vacationing on private yachts in Monaco. And what do I get? A husband who has to check his bank account before buying groceries. I am a Hayes. I was born for greatness, not to be anchored to a loser." Every word shattered another piece of the man who stood before her. The man who could have bought Monaco for her if she had only shown him a shred of genuine affection. "Is it Eric?" Brandon asked quietly, his jaw clenching. He had seen the texts. He wasn't stupid. Sarah flinched, but quickly masked it with arrogance. "Eric is a man with a future. He knows my worth. You're just a charity case my father brought home. Sign the papers, Brandon. Get out of my life." Brandon looked at the woman he had loved for 10 years. He searched her eyes for any hint of regret, any spark of the brave girl from high school. There was nothing, only greed, only vanity. Something inside Brandon snapped. The kind, patient man died right then and there on the bedroom carpet. He didn't yell, he didn't plead. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a cheap plastic pen, and picked up the papers. Without a second glance, he signed his name. Brandon Sterling. The signature of a man who owned half the city, hidden beneath a sloppy scribble. He dropped the pen. It clattered against the hardwood floor. "You have your freedom, Sarah," Brandon said. His voice was completely devoid of emotion now. It was terrifyingly cold. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing just at the threshold. "But remember this moment. Remember that you threw away my heart because you thought my pockets were empty." He glanced back over his shoulder, his eyes now hard as steel. "When you fall, and you will fall, don't expect me to be at the bottom to catch you." The door closed with a quiet, final click. Outside, the heavy rain began to pour. Brandon walked out into the storm, abandoning the rusted car in the driveway. At the end of the street, a sleek, black, bulletproof Maybach silently pulled up beside him. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, holding an umbrella over Brandon. "Welcome back, Mr. Sterling," the assistant said respectfully. "Shall we return to the headquarters?" Brandon looked back at the Hayes mansion one last time. The love in his eyes was dead. Only ruthless ambition remained. "Yes, and tell the board I'm ready to take over." 6 months. That was all it took for the illusion to shatter. The sun was shining over Manhattan, but inside Eric's luxury penthouse, a chilling silence hung in the air. Sarah stepped out of the private elevator, carrying a cup of artisan coffee. "Eric, honey, I was thinking about that trip to Milan." The words died in her throat. The penthouse was empty. The custom Italian leather sofas, the expensive art, Eric's designer luggage, all gone. It looked as if no one had ever lived there. Panicked, she dropped the coffee. The dark liquid splattered across the pristine white marble floor. She frantically dialed his number, once, twice, 3 times. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." The automated voice felt like a slap to the face. On the kitchen counter, weighed down by a single cheap house key, was a handwritten note. Sarah's hands trembled as she picked it up. "Thanks for the capital, Princess. The company funds have cleared my offshore accounts. Paris is beautiful this time of year. Don't wait up. Eric." Betrayal. A cold, suffocating wave of pure betrayal crashed over her. He didn't just leave her. He had convinced her to forge her father's signature to secure a massive bridge loan against the Hayes family company. Sarah sprinted out of the building, hailing a cab in the pouring rain. Her designer heels splashed in the muddy puddles, ruining the expensive leather. When she arrived at Hayes Innovations, it was a scene of absolute chaos. Police cars flashed their red and blue lights against the glass facade. Federal auditors were carrying out boxes of files. Dad!" Sarah screamed, pushing through the crowd of panicked employees. In the center of the lobby stood Professor Hayes. He looked a decade older than he had that morning. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief as an officer handed him a document. $50 million. Her father gasped, his voice barely a whisper. $50 million in debt. The pension funds, the family trust, it's all gone. He looked up and saw Sarah. The guilt and terror in his daughter's eyes confirmed his worst nightmare. She had given Eric the access codes. "Sarah, what have you done?" he choked out. Suddenly, Professor Hayes clutched his chest, his face contorted in sheer agony. Dad!" Sarah lunged forward just as his knees buckled. He hit the marble floor hard, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The sterile, chaotic noise of the lobby faded into a high-pitched ring as paramedics rushed in. Sarah knelt in a pool of rainwater and her own tears, holding her father's lifeless hand. 2 months later, the Hayes mansion had been foreclosed by the bank. Sarah was now living in a run-down, roach-infested motel in the darkest corner of the Bronx. A far cry from her custom silk robes, she wore a faded, oversized sweater. Bang! 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 The flimsy wooden doors shook violently. Dust fell from the ceiling. "Open up, princess!" A gruff, menacing voice barked from the hallway. "We know you're in there. Your boyfriend borrowed heavily from the Vipers before he skipped town. And guess whose name is on the guarantor line?" Sarah sat on the edge of the cheap mattress, her knees pulled tight to her chest, covering her mouth with both hands to stifle her sobs. "If you don't have the cash by Friday, we're taking it out of your pretty skin. We know places downtown that pay top dollar for girls like you." They kicked the door one last time before their heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Sarah scrambled to her phone, dialing the numbers of her best friends, the women who used to drink champagne on her family's yacht. Call declined. Call ignored. "Sorry, Sarah, my husband says we can't be associated with you right now. Good luck." She was entirely, utterly alone. In the dark room, a memory flashed in her mind. Brandon standing in the rain, his eyes cold as steel. "When you fall, don't expect me to be at the bottom to catch you." She curled into a ball on the floor, weeping bitterly. He was right. She had thrown away a diamond to pick up a rock. The harsh fluorescent lights of the ICU flickered. The doctor stood with his arms crossed, looking at Sarah with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. "Ms. Hayes, the life support machines cost $3,000 a day. His insurance has been frozen due to the federal investigation. If you cannot provide a $50,000 deposit by the end of the month, we will have to transfer him to a state facility. He won't survive the move." Sarah looked through the glass window at her father. He was surrounded by tubes, looking frail and broken. "I'll get the money," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "Please, just keep him breathing." For the next 3 weeks, Sarah walked miles across the city, handing out her resume. But the name Hayes was now toxic. Nobody wanted to hire the disgraced daughter of a ruined empire. Desperation eroded her pride. She stopped applying for management roles. She stopped applying for desk jobs. Finally, sitting on a cold park bench, gnawing on a stale piece of bread, her cracked phone buzzed. "Is this Sarah Hayes?" a sharp professional voice asked. Yes, it is. "This is HR from Sterling Financial Group. We saw your application for the janitorial and general assistant position. It's minimum wage, scrubbing floors, making coffee, and running errands for the executive floor. Are you still interested? Sterling Financial, the most ruthless, powerful investment firm on Wall Street. The old Sarah would have laughed and hung up. The new Sarah closed her eyes, swallowing her tears. "I'll take it," she whispered. "I'll do anything." She hung up, a bitter smile touching her lips. She was going to scrub floors to save her father's life. But as she walked toward the towering glass skyscraper of Sterling Financial, she had absolutely no idea who was sitting on the top floor, waiting for her. The top floor of Sterling Financial was a fortress of glass, steel, and intimidating silence. Sarah pushed her heavy cleaning cart down the hallway. Her hands, once soft and manicured, were now rough and blistered from harsh chemicals. "Hey, newbie," the head assistant snapped. "The CEO wants his black coffee. Bring it into his office, and don't look him in the eye. He's in a terrible mood." Sarah nodded meekly. She balanced the fine porcelain cup on a silver tray and pushed open the massive mahogany doors. The corner office was breathtaking, overlooking the entire Manhattan skyline. At the far end, a man in a bespoke Tom Ford suit sat in a high-backed leather chair facing the window. "Your coffee, sir," Sarah said softly, keeping her head bowed. The leather chair slowly turned around. "Put it on the desk, Sarah." The voice sent a violently cold shockwave through her body. She froze. Slowly, she lifted her eyes. The tray slipped from her hands. Crash. The hot coffee shattered across the $1 million Persian rug. Sitting behind the massive executive desk, exuding raw power and a terrifying aura, was Brandon. He wasn't the man in the rusted car. He was Brandon Sterling, the ruthless billionaire, the king of Wall Street. "We're Brandon," Sarah whispered, her face draining of all color. Her legs threatened to give way. Brandon leaned back, resting his chin on his fingertips. His eyes were completely dead, locking onto her with a predator's gaze. "It's Mr. Sterling in this building," he said, his voice dripping with ice. "And you just ruined my rug. Grab a towel and get on your knees. Clean it up." For the next 2 weeks, Brandon made Sarah's life a living hell. He assigned her to clean the abandoned underground archives, a dark, suffocating basement filled with decades of dust. He made her catalog thousands of heavy boxes by hand. One afternoon, during a brutal New York blizzard, he called her on the intercom. "I want a latte from that cafe on 4th Street. Be back in 10 minutes, or you're fired." Sarah ran out into the freezing storm wearing only a thin jacket. When she returned, shivering and blue, handing him the cup, he took one sip and poured it into the trash can. "Too cold," Brandon said without looking up from his laptop. "Go get another one." Sarah bit her violently shaking lip. The old Sarah would have screamed, thrown the cup at him, and quit. But the new Sarah thought of her father on life support. She thought of the hospital bills. She swallowed the massive lump of humiliation in her throat. "Right away, Mr. Sterling," she whispered, turning back toward the door. As the door closed, Brandon's fingers stopped typing. He closed his eyes, his jaw clenched so hard it ached. Watching her suffer tore at his soul, but he had to stay strong. She needed to break before she could be rebuilt. Midnight. The executive floor was empty. Brandon stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of bourbon in his hand. Behind him, Marcus, his imposing head of security, stepped out of the shadows. "Sir, the Vipers," Marcus reported. "The gang harassing Ms. Hayes in the Bronx." "Did you take care of it?" Brandon's voice was lethal, carrying a terrifying calmness. "Yes, sir. We bought out their debt. Then we paid their boss a little visit. They have been informed that if anyone so much as looks at Ms. Hayes or breathes in her direction, they will disappear from this city forever." Brandon nodded slowly. "Good. And her father?" Professor Hayes has been moved to the Diamond 5 IP suite at Mount Sinai. The top cardiologists in the country are operating on him tomorrow. All expenses have been fully paid under a shell corporation. She has no idea it's you. Keep it that way, Brandon ordered, downing his drink. He didn't want her gratitude. He wanted her to understand the cruel reality of the world she had so easily cast him out into. He wanted to forge her into a woman who could survive anything. The next morning, Sarah rushed to the hospital after her shift. She fully expected to see her father in the dingy, crowded state ward. Instead, a nurse guided her to the top floor, to a private, luxurious suite filled with fresh flowers and state-of-the-art medical equipment. Professor Hayes was awake, looking significantly better. "Dad, what is all this? How?" Sarah cried, running to his side and holding his hand. The head doctor walked in with a warm smile. "An anonymous benefactor stepped in last night, Miss Hayes. They covered everything. The surgery, the room, all of it." Sarah covered her mouth, sobbing with relief. A miracle. It was an absolute miracle. But as Sarah went to fetch some water, Professor Hayes looked at the bedside table. Resting there was a small, sleek black fountain pen, the exact kind he had gifted his star pupil, Brandon, years ago. Professor Hayes closed his eyes, tears slipping down his wrinkled cheeks. He knew. He knew who the anonymous benefactor was. His heart broke with a profound sense of guilt. His foolish daughter had completely shattered the heart of the greatest man he had ever known. Yet, even in his pain, Brandon was saving them. When Sarah returned, Professor Hayes squeezed her hand weakly. "Sarah, whatever hardship you are facing right now, endure it. You must learn. You must grow up." He whispered hoarsely. He wouldn't tell her the truth. She needed to earn Brandon's forgiveness herself. Late Friday evening, the office was deserted. Sarah was on her hands and knees in the grand lobby, scrubbing the marble floors. Her back ached violently. Her hands were raw and bleeding. Suddenly, a pair of expensive Italian leather shoes stepped into her line of sight. She looked up. Brandon stood over her, his expression unreadable. "You missed a spot," he said coldly, pointing his polished cane at a microscopic smudge near her knee. Sarah wiped the sweat from her forehead. She didn't argue. She didn't complain. She simply shifted her tired body, took her rag, and scrubbed the spot until it shined. "Is that satisfactory, Mr. Sterling?" she asked, her voice steady, stripping away every ounce of her former arrogance. Brandon stared at her bruised knees and bloody fingers. A brief, almost imperceptible flash of pain crossed his eyes. "It'll do," he muttered, turning away quickly before she could see the crack in his armor. He walked into the private elevator, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his heart waging a brutal war against his mind. The fire was burning her pride to ashes. But from those ashes, something far more beautiful was beginning to rise. Monday morning, the atmosphere on the executive floor was electric. The elevator doors opened, and the sharp, confident click-clack of Christian Louboutin heels echoed down the marble hallway. Enter Chloe, the newly appointed creative director of Sterling Financial. She was stunning. Ash blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a sleek, tailored Chanel suit that screamed power and sophistication. She was everything Sarah used to be, but with an Ivy League brain to match. Sarah was on her knees near the boardroom, wiping the baseboards. She pulled her oversized janitor's cap down, trying to make herself invisible. "Brandon." Chloe's voice was melodic, ringing out as she walked straight into the CEO's office without knocking. Sarah froze. Nobody ever called the ruthless Mr. Sterling by his first name. Nobody. Through the crack in the door, Sarah saw Brandon stand up from his desk. But he didn't yell. He didn't fire her. Instead, the cold, impenetrable ice on Brandon's face melted. He offered a warm, devastatingly handsome smile. A smile Sarah hadn't seen since the day she handed him the divorce papers. "Chloe, it's good to have you here," Brandon said smoothly, stepping out from behind his desk. Lunchtime, the head assistant pushed a silver trolley towards Sarah. "Take this catered lunch to Mr. Sterling's office. He's dining with the new director," she ordered. Sarah's hands shook as she gripped the handle. Every step toward that massive mahogany door felt like walking on broken glass. She pushed the door open quietly. Inside, the scene tore her heart straight out of her chest. Brandon and Chloe were sitting on the leather sofa, going over a portfolio. Their shoulders were brushing. Chloe laughed at something he said, lightly touching his arm. And Brandon, he let her. He didn't pull away. He looked at Chloe with admiration and respect. "Excuse me," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible as she began placing the plates on the table. Chloe paused and looked at Sarah. Her sharp eyes scanned the faded uniform, the messy hair, the blistered hands. "Oh, Brandon, is this the new cleaning girl you told me about? The one from the unfortunate background?" Chloe asked, her tone dripping with polished condescension. Brandon didn't look at Sarah. He kept his eyes fixed on the documents. "Yes, just leave the food and go. Make sure you wipe down the door handles on your way out, sweetheart." Chloe added dismissively, "Hygiene is so important." Sarah bit her inner lip so hard she tasted copper. She bowed her head, the humiliation burning like acid in her veins. "Yes, ma'am." She practically ran out of the room. Behind her, she heard them laughing again. Sarah locked herself in the handicap stall of the women's restroom. She slid down the wall, clutching her chest, and sobbed uncontrollably. The jealousy was a physical pain, ripping her apart. She was losing him, not just as a husband, but as a man. He was moving on, and why wouldn't he? Chloe was perfect. Chloe was a partner. What was Sarah? A spoiled brat who couldn't recognize a king when he stood in front of her. Sarah stood up and walked to the massive mirror. She looked at her tear-stained face, her red eyes, her pathetic uniform. Suddenly, an epiphany struck her like a lightning bolt. Chloe's condescending look, the arrogant tone. It was exactly how Sarah used to treat Brandon. She saw her past self in Chloe, and it repulsed her. She felt sick to her stomach. She had been a monster, a shallow, cruel monster. Sarah turned the faucet on cold. She splashed the freezing water on her face, washing away the tears, washing away the pity. She looked her reflection in the eyes. The spoiled princess was dead. "I won't let it end like this," she whispered to the empty room. "I will not let her take him. I will earn him back, even if it kills me." 11 p.m. The Sterling building was entirely dark, except for a dim light shining in the deserted sales and acquisitions department. Sarah had finished her cleaning shift 2 hours ago, but she hadn't gone home. She was sitting on the floor, surrounded by discarded pitch decks, market research files, and rejected investment portfolios from the trash bins. Before she was a spoiled wife, she was a top graduate of Columbia Business School. She just never used her brain, preferring to use her credit card. Now she was using it. She highlighted numbers, took furious notes on scraps of paper, and analyzed the flaws in the company's recent failed bids. If she wanted Brandon to see her, truly see her, she couldn't just scrub floors. She had to bring value. She had to fight in his arena. 4 floors above, in the master control room, glowing screens illuminated the darkness. Brandon stood behind the security guard, his eyes locked onto camera 4B. He watched Sarah. He saw her rubbing her tired red eyes, drinking a cheap energy drink, and diving back into a 400-page financial prospectus. A profound silence fell over him. "Do you want me to kick her out, sir? She's not authorized to be in that department," the guard asked nervously. Brandon didn't answer immediately. He traced the screen with his eyes, watching the fierce, unyielding determination on Sarah's face. It was the exact same look she had in high school when she stood in front of those thugs to protect him. She was waking up. The fire had been ignited. A ghost of a smile, proud, secret, and filled with a dangerous amount of hope, touched the corners of his mouth. "No," Brandon said softly. "Let her work. Disable the motion sensors on that floor and make sure the heating stays on all night." He turned and walked away into the shadows. The real game was just beginning. 2 weeks later, Sarah had compiled a flawless 50-page acquisition proposal. It was brilliant, targeting Richard Vance, a notorious real estate tycoon that even Chloe had failed to sign. Knowing Chloe would steal her work, Sarah bypassed the entire executive floor. She used her old high society connections to secure a private, off-the-books meeting with Vance himself. It was a massive risk. If she failed, she would be fired. But if she won, Brandon would have to look at her. "I'm not a maid," Sarah whispered to herself in the lobby mirror, adjusting a thrift store blazer she had meticulously ironed. "I am a Hayes, and I am going to win." The meeting wasn't in an office. It was in Vance's private, dimly lit suite at the Obsidian Hotel. Richard Vance, a heavy-set man with greedy eyes, poured 2 glasses of expensive whiskey. He didn't even look at the proposal Sarah placed on the table. "You know, Sarah," Vance purred, walking behind her chair and placing a heavy hand on her shoulder. "I remember you from the gala 2 years ago. You were wearing red. A breathtaking little rich girl." Sarah stiffened, subtly pulling away. "Mr. Vance, if you look at page 4, you'll see how Sterling Financial can increase your profit margin by—" "I don't care about margins," Vance interrupted, sliding his hand down to her waist. "I care about fringe benefits. Signatures can be bought, sweetheart. The question is, how bad do you want this deal?" Panic seized Sarah's throat. She stood up sharply, grabbing her files. "I think this meeting is over. Have a good evening, Mr. Vance." But as she rushed to the heavy oak doors, they wouldn't budge. They were electronically locked. Vance chuckled, loosening his tie as he advanced toward her. "You're a bankrupt nobody, Sarah. You scrub floors for Brandon Sterling. Who's going to believe a janitor over a billionaire?" He lunged, pinning her violently against the wall. The smell of alcohol and cheap cologne made her stomach churn. "Get off me!" Sarah screamed, thrashing wildly. The old Sarah would have fainted. But this Sarah had survived the slums. She had survived humiliation. She wasn't going to be a victim anymore. Her hand scrambled across the side table, her fingers wrapping around the neck of a heavy crystal vase. With a fierce cry, she smashed it directly into the side of Vance's head. Vance roared in pain, stumbling back, blood trickling down his face. "You stupid bitch! I'll kill you!" He lunged at her again, his massive hands reaching for her throat. Sarah closed her eyes, preparing for the fatal blow. Boom! The heavy oak doors didn't just open. They were kicked off their steel hinges with the force of a bomb going off. Brandon stood in the doorway. He wasn't the cold, calculated CEO anymore. He was a force of pure, untamed destruction. His eyes were black with murderous rage. "Brandon," Vance stuttered, his face draining of blood. Before Vance could finish his sentence, Brandon was on him. He grabbed the heavy-set tycoon by the throat, lifted him off his feet, and slammed him through the glass coffee table. Glass shattered everywhere. Vance screamed in agony, but Brandon didn't stop. He unleashed a barrage of ruthless, devastating punches, turning the tycoon's face into a bloody mess. "Touch her again," Brandon snarled, his voice a demonic whisper, "and I will erase your bloodline from this earth." Marcus, the security chief, ran in, pulling Brandon off the unconscious man. Sir, he's done. You'll kill him." Brandon breathed heavily, his knuckles bleeding. He turned around. Sarah was huddled in the corner, clutching her torn blazer, trembling violently. The monster inside Brandon vanished instantly. He took off his custom suit jacket and wrapped it gently around her shaking shoulders. He pulled her against his chest, burying his face in her hair. "I've got you," he whispered, his own voice breaking. "I'm here. You're safe." Sarah buried her face in his chest, clutching his shirt like it was the only thing keeping her alive, and finally broke down. The rain battered the windows of the bulletproof Maybach as it sped through the neon-lit streets of Manhattan. Sarah sat next to Brandon in the back seat. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind an unbearable, crushing wave of guilt. She looked at him. The man who owned half the city. The man who had rushed in to save her life. "Why?" she choked out, tears spilling over her eyelashes. "Why did you save me? After what I did to you, after what I said, I threw you away." Brandon looked straight ahead at the rain, his jaw tight. "Do you think I wanted this, Sarah? Do you think I enjoyed watching you scrub floors until your hands bled?" He finally turned to her, his eyes filled with a raw, agonizing vulnerability. "I didn't hide my money to test you. I hid it because my family's wealth destroyed everyone who touched it. I just wanted someone to love the man driving the rusty car. But you wanted the crown. You didn't want the king." Sarah covered her face, sobbing. "I was a fool. I was blind, arrogant, and stupid. I thought money was safety. But when I lost everything, when I was sleeping on the floor and my father was dying, I didn't cry for the money, Brandon." She looked up, reaching out a trembling hand to touch his cheek. He didn't pull away. "I cried because I missed my best friend. I missed the man who bought me a cheap necklace and smiled like he was giving me the world. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry." Brandon closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. The ice fortress he had built around his heart completely shattered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped a few buttons and handed it to her. Sarah looked at the screen. It was a medical bill for Mount Sinai Hospital. Fully paid. The donor name read, Brandon Sterling. She scrolled down. There were property deeds. He hadn't just paid the thugs, he had bought the entire Hayes estate from the bank to save it from foreclosure. Sarah gasped, the realization hitting her like a physical weight. You were the shadow. You were protecting me this whole time." "I broke you, Sarah," Brandon said softly, wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Because I needed to kill the spoiled princess. I needed the fierce, brilliant girl who saved me in high school to wake up. And she did." He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a stack of papers. It was the 50-page acquisition proposal she had written. "I read this while you were asleep in the archives." Brandon smiled. "It's a masterpiece. Chloe couldn't write something this brilliant if she had 10 years. The Maybach pulled up to the grand entrance of the Sterling penthouse. Brandon didn't open the door for her to act like a maid. He offered his hand. "I don't want a maid, Sarah, and I don't want a trophy wife," Brandon said, looking deep into her eyes. "I want a partner, an equal, someone to rule this empire with me." Sarah looked at his outstretched hand. She wasn't the arrogant girl who threw the divorce papers. She wasn't the broken woman scrubbing floors. She was forged in the fire, polished by hardship. She placed her hand firmly in his. "Then let's build an empire." She smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears and newfound strength. Brandon pulled her close, crashing his lips onto hers in a passionate, desperate kiss that erased all the pain, all the lies, and all the lost time. The rusty car was gone. The fake wealth was gone. What remained was the only thing that mattered. A love that survived the fire. And so, the girl who threw away a diamond for a rock learned the hardest lesson of all. But she fought her way back from the ashes, not to claim a billionaire's wallet, but to win back a king's heart.
And that is why you should never throw away a diamond just because it has a little dust on it. What a roller coaster. Now, I want to hear from you. Did Sarah deserve to scrub floors to learn her lesson, or do you think Brandon's revenge went a little too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If this story gave you chills, show us some love by hitting that like button and subscribe to the channel for more intense, satisfying romance stories every single week. The drama doesn't stop here, though. Click the video on your screen right now for another mind-blowing story of fake identities, sweet karma, and billionaire romance. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. See you in the next chapter.